Yes, I'd love to introduce Jacob, a friend of mine who actually came down from Santa Barbara for this. He's got a very most exciting background. Jacob Tell, the driving force behind the branding and creative marketing agency Oniracom, founded in 2001, has spent more than 2 decades pioneering a culture of positive disruption. His journey is not merely a career, but a tapestry of relationships, a commitment to team building, and a steadfast dedication to shaping culture. With an educational background in film and politics, Jacob seeks world-changing solutions for positive and creative people. He carries with him a deep appreciation for nature and hopeful vision for the future of human ecology. Within the realm of Anirakam, Jacob has both a reality TV pilot, a film production company, a record label, a thought-provoking print zine, a trio of non-profit compilation music albums, and a vibrant music and arts festival in Santa Barbara. And cutting edge digital signage technology, insightful cannabis symposium series, a neighborhood branding initiative, and many more different initiatives. He has orchestrated dozens of community events, managed production operations, curated art installations, overseen major construction projects, and most recently embarked on a journey to launch a pioneering psychedelic social club. He has traveled the world with rock star Jack Johnson, managing an international eco-friendly merchandise operation, and transformed a vacant building into Lodo Studios in Santa Barbara, where I had the pleasure of giving a talk in this sort of art gallery studio. I can't even explain, but it's worth going to Santa Barbara to look at. So please welcome my friend, Jacob Tell.
Thank you. Thank you, Kitty. Hi, everybody. Okay, I'm glad I don't have to give my CV. Thank you for that. If I'm speaking too quickly, please just raise your hand and I'll slow down. If you can't hear me, raise your hand. I want to make sure everyone can hear what I have to say. So today I hope to give you a way to think clearly about a topic that you've most likely only heard distorted versions of, and that is psychedelics and the psychedelic ecosystem that, as Kitty said, we've recently launched a psychedelic social club in Santa Barbara that's growing into other cities about 3+ years ago. So I've been at this now for almost 4 years, and we've got all sorts of speakers that come in, thought leaders. So I've been very exposed to a lot of the information, the knowledge, and the wisdom from this space. So I'm hoping to share a little bit of that here today and help break some of the stigmas that surround psychedelics and the history of psychedelics. So I got to use this clicker. We're ready for the second slide. I think I need to tell you that. Okay, so truth, it's a big concept here. That's the promise of our time together today, is that this isn't about advocacy or a sales pitch for a drug or a company or a belief system. We're going to take an honest look at 3 things. We're going to look at the history, the science, and the policy, including a recent federal executive order signed less than 1 month ago around psychedelics. And then we're going to dive specifically into psilocybin mushrooms as a popular topic of conversation. So we're going to start broad, and then we're going to go and zoom into psilocybin mushrooms, okay? So you're going to leave with a clearer picture than most adults have, and what you do with that picture is entirely up to you. Will this work now? Not quite. Okay, there we go. I'm in charge now. All right, I got the power. Look out. So I just want to say a little bit about what I'm not. I think that's really important. I'm not a doctor. I am not a licensed therapist. I'm not an Indigenous leader. And I'm not here to tell you to experience anything. My role is a synthesizer, a storyteller, and a bridge. I'm here to share what I've learned from years of listening to scientists, to therapists, and to Indigenous leaders and everyday people on their healing journeys. And as I said, about 3.5 years, we've now hosted over 100 conversations, discussion panels, interviews, workshops with all sorts of folks around, the medical community, the therapy community, the Indigenous leadership community. So this, again, we're going to be talking about the history, the culture, and the context around psychedelics, not prescriptions or promotion. So the word psychedelics is a kind of a loaded word. There's so many things that it can be referring to. The actual word psychedelic was coined in 1956 by Humphrey Osmond. He worked a lot with Aldous Huxley, and it actually means mind manifesting or mind revealing. So that's what the word psychedelics means. There's a few categories here on the screen of different psychedelics. We've got the classical group of psychedelics that act on our serotonin receptors in our brains. This is psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, DMT, mescaline, and the toad, 5-MeO-DMT. We also have MDMA. A lot of people call this ecstasy. This is an empathogen. So this is different, pharmacologically speaking, than the classical psychedelics, but it's grouped here because of its therapeutic profile and potential. There's also ketamine, the one in this group that's actually legal. You can actually go to ketamine clinics today and get therapy. This is called a dissociative, a different class of drug. This works actually not on the 5-HT2A receptors in the brain, but it works on a different mechanism altogether. This is really the gateway for the modern era of psychedelics because, again, it's a Schedule 3, not a Schedule 1, meaning that it does have medical value in the eyes of our society. And so, therefore, we have ketamine clinics in all 50 states. And then last but not least, I kind of had to tack this on the bottom corner as I ran out of space, but ibogaine is really big in the conversation right now. It's its own category. It's derived from a plant in Africa, in West Africa, called iboga, and it's used in addiction treatment. So you're going to hear a lot about this from the federal government. Again, that executive order that President Trump just signed less than a month ago specifically carved out $50 million in research for ibogaine. And this is really important because they're using it a lot for veterans with PTSD. And so you're going to hear a lot about ibogaine if you haven't already. Your antenna will probably pick up on it now as you see this through the news. So the psychedelic renaissance is here. We're in the middle of what we like to call the third wave. And I'm going to explain what the first and the second wave of psychedelics from a historical context is. But the third wave is where we are currently in the modern research era of psychedelics. There's, a gentleman named Michael Pollan, maybe you're familiar with as an author. He's come out with a book in 2019, and that really was the tipping point in society for people to realize that this is a topic of interest again, and to kind of open up their minds to looking into what psychedelic potentials have. There's a Netflix documentary after the same name, How to Change Your Mind, from Michael Pollan's book. So if you haven't seen that, it's on Netflix. It's fantastic. Speaking of fantastic, there's also the Fantastic Fungi documentary on Netflix. And most recently, there's the Waves in War Veterans and PTSD documentary on Netflix. So there's many films and documentaries in the zeitgeist right now during this third wave. There's also decriminalization bills happening in multiple states. The FDA has approved clinical trials. Like I said, ketamine clinics are on Main Street in 50 states. And literally, again, I'm going to repeat this a few times, but as of April, a month ago, the federal government has an executive order signed by Trump to fast track psychedelic research by the FDA. So that is, and we'll get into a little bit more of the detail in a minute. But the trendy headlines, they don't always tell the whole story. So we want to make sense of where we are. And in order to do that, we have to go back. We have to look at it historically and go back to the first wave. And so, again, what is the first wave? We're going to walk you through these three eras. and then go into the psilocybin mushroom conversation more specifically. So the first wave is indigenous and ceremonial use. This is spanning tens of thousands of years on every inhabited continent. Each tribe used different psychedelic native plants, animals, and fungi. A lot of people in the space use the term plant medicine. I actually like the term earth medicine because plants are only a part of what medicines were used indigenously. You have, again, have animals like the toad, you have fungi like mushrooms. These are not plants. Then comes the second wave. The second wave is really when Western science got curious. This is about 1938 to 1970 before Nixon's war on drugs took it all down. So this is Albert Hofmann synthesizing LSD in Switzerland in 1938. This is Wasserman meeting Maria Sabina in Mexico and having the magic mushroom being introduced to the West for the first time. This is Timothy Leary running experiments at Harvard University. And then, of course, the crackdown, 1972, we ended up with Nixon's a Controlled Substances Act, and that's when everything changed. Then there was the dark era, which was basically from Nixon's administration until about the late 90s. Then the third wave started. This is, again, the modern scientific renaissance. And we actually had Johns Hopkins University running one of the first studies in the 90s. We have the MAPS organization. We have FDA breakthrough designations. All of this happened from late 90s through today. So again, just to recap, these three waves, we're going to go into a little more detail. Most people have the stigma of that second wave of seeing what happened after the war on drugs, having this idea in their minds that these are dangerous substances that don't have a lot of potential for therapeutic use and that have a high potential for abuse. And unfortunately, that was propaganda that actually worked from the Nixon administration. So we're here to help kind of chisel away at those stigmas. So no matter the medical setting, the clinical setting, the therapeutic setting, we find ourselves during this current and modern third wave of psychedelics needing to go back, being connected to our ancestors, being connected to our lineages. They were the ones who evolved alongside the psychedelic compounds and what we like to call non-ordinary states of consciousness. You can reach non-ordinary states of consciousness through meditation, through breath work, through exercise, through yoga, all sorts of different ways, not just psychedelics use. Despite our attunement to this evolution of humanity, we have always had direct connection to spirit and creator. And there remains a spiritual component of these molecules, of these medicines, and of the experiences around them, no matter how studies, colonized or capitalized our use may become. So just to remind people, there's nothing wrong with having different containers of use for these psychedelics. Some people feel very much they will only use them in a medical setting or a therapeutic setting, and that's fine. But there's also indigenous settings, ceremonial settings, personal settings, small group settings. And we like to look at all of these as long as you're being safe and responsible, they all have value and merit. All right, so again, this first wave, I just want to highlight a couple of really important compounds, molecules, and which cultures they tied to. And this is not a comprehensive list. This is just 6, but we have psilocybin mushrooms. This is from Mesoamerica. This is, going back to 1000 BC and before. By the way, these dates are just when we found archaeological evidence of their use. They definitely were used much before that. So I'm only giving you kind of where we have proof of use, where they're finding artifacts that may have little bits of DNA from the mushroom in like a chalice cup. So we know, okay, in this area, they dated that cup at 1000 BC, which is really 3000 years ago. So this is Aztecs. They called the mushrooms the flesh of the gods. Then we have peyote. This is American Southwest, a sacrament of the Native Americans. And 3700 BC, we can trace back peyote use. So 5700 years, right there. Ayahuasca down in the Amazon basin. This is the Shipibo and other tribes. Dozens of actual traditions have been using ayahuasca. We've only kind of got proof about 500 BC, but they've estimated this goes way back 12,000 years, 10 to 12,000 years. Iboga, which I mentioned in West Africa, the Bwiti tradition in Gabon, again about 1,000 years ago. Amanita muscaria, this is the red and white mushroom that Santa Claus is based on, and you see them in like Super Mario Brothers. These are popular little emojis on your iPhone. Amanita muscaria mushrooms. This goes back to Siberia and the shamans that use them to commute with the spirit world. And they actually have shown 6,000 BC, so 8,000 years ago, they found evidence of Amanita muscaria use in those traditions. And then last but not least, the Eleusinian mysteries in ancient Greece, 1600 BC. This was a drink that was laced with ergot, and ergot is it grows on wheat. It's a fungus, and it's basically similar to LSD. So it's like a naturally grown and occurring LSD molecule. They found that this was what Plato and many of the philosophers were going and drinking and coming up with their amazing, concepts back then. So again, this is in humanity's culture and history for, millennia. And so it's really important that when we think about, a country that's 250 years old making laws arbitrarily to say these plants are okay and these plants are not okay, we have to really look at why, our government wants to control our cognitive liberties in those contexts. So again, colonization, white supremacy, and Western religious institutions, they saw the power of these substances and they feared it. Since they couldn't control the sacraments, they banned them, criminalized the ceremonies, demonized the people and practices. Any conversation about psychedelics in 2026 has to begin by honoring our ancestors' use and how they were taken away. All right, we're going to the second wave. So that was the first wave. Second wave, again, Western science gets curious about some of these things. This is about a 32-year window defined where psychedelics were not just a counterculture symbol yet, but a legitimate area of mainstream psychiatric research and work. So Albert Hofmann, this is a big name that comes up as a chemist, again in Switzerland. 1938, he synthesizes LSD, doesn't know what to do with it, puts it on a shelf, kind of goes away for 5-6 years. April 19th, 1943, this is known as Bicycle Day. This is a holiday in the psychedelic world. People celebrate every April 19th riding around on their bicycles because Albert Hofmann decided to get that LSD molecule off the shelf, and he decided, I'm going to try this. I guess back then, when you were a chemist, you would just eat what you made, and that's how we discovered what would happen. But thank you, Albert, for doing that, because otherwise we would not know about LSD in this context. And he ended up having the first human LSD trip, and he ended up not being able to work for the rest of the day. So he left on his bicycle and he rode home, and he wrote about it in his journals. And that's how we have Bicycle Day today. 1955, Gordon Wasserman is a banker. He travels to Mexico, and he takes mushrooms ceremonially with Maria Sabina. This is one of the first times that the West is exposed to what was then called magic mushrooms on the cover of Life magazine. And I think it was 1956. And all of a sudden, America was exposed to this concept of magic mushrooms by Life magazine because of Wasserman's trip to Mexico. 1957, that's when the Life magazine article reaches tens of millions of Americans. 1958, Albert Hofmann, again, our LSD friend, isolates the active compound psilocybin, which is in the mushroom, the magic mushroom, from Wasserman's samples. So they actually worked together in the 50s. And then 1960s, we had Harvard. We had Timothy Leary. We had Richard Alpert, known as Ram Dass, over 1,000 peer-reviewed papers on LSD. There's promising early research in alcoholism, end-of-life anxiety, and depression. So this is all happening in respectable academic journals. Then all of a sudden, it stopped. Why was that? So this is a piece of the story I want to dive into because it kind of connects the first and the second wave, this indigenous use, then this therapeutic use in the West again, that's Maria Sabina in Mexico, who was a curandera. She was a healer. She worked with these flesh of the god, these mushrooms. And Wasserman, he was a vice president of JP Morgan. He was an amateur entobotanist, and he and his wife traveled to Mexico in 1955 and convinced this Maztec curandera, this healer, Maria Sabina, to let him participate in a mushroom ceremony. Someone from the West sitting in circle in Mexico. I mean, think about that in the 50s. So he publishes this, 1957, 2 years, this Seeking the Magic Mushroom article in Life magazine. Tens of millions of readers see this. It's the first time that Westerners hear about psilocybin. And then there's a cost to this. After the article, the small town in Mexico was overwhelmed by tourists, by hippies, by seekers. And Maria Sabina was ostracized by her own community for sharing sacred medicine with outsiders. Her home was burned. Her son was murdered. She died in poverty in 1985, the same year, ironically, that MDMA was emergency scheduled by the DEA as illegal. So this is not a clean story. We have to have these honest conversations about modern day psychedelics and their roots and their history to acknowledge the efforts and effects of Westernization and colonization. Okay, then we get to a really pivotal moment in time here, which is Nixon's response to this cognitive liberty that was fueling the free-thinking hippies and their anti-Vietnam War sentiment. So in 1968, first, LSD was criminalized. In 1970, the Controlled Substances Act was signed into law. This immediately outlawed cannabis, psilocybin, LSD, mescaline, among others, putting them all on Schedule 1. And when you put something in Schedule 1, it means two things. It means this has a high risk of abuse and it has no accepted medical value whatsoever. Immediately cutting off research. Harvard, Ram Dass, Timothy Leary had to stop doing their research instantaneously. In 1971, Nixon declares there's a war on drugs. Years later, Nixon's top domestic policy advisor, John Ehrlichman, admitted to a reporter, Dan Baum, this is a quote I'm going to read you, "We couldn't make it illegal to be Black or against the war. But by getting the public to associate them with drugs and then criminalizing it heavily, we could disrupt those communities." That is a direct quote from Nixon's administration years later. So just to show you the history and the roots of the war on drugs and what they were trying to control. The second wave was not shut down because it failed. It was shut down because it worked for the people, not for the state. All right, and then 1985, this is perhaps one of the most critically devastating moments of our mental health issues today can be linked back to this moment in 1985. In the 70s and early 80s, MDMA, again, people call this substance ecstasy or Molly. It's very popular in the dance and music scenes and rave culture. But before that, it wasn't a party drug at all. It was a breakthrough tool for psychotherapy. Thousands of therapists were legally using MDMA to help their patients process traumas, deepen trust, access repressed memories, and it was showing real promise. As the war on drugs ramped up, nuance gave way to fear, and in 1985, the DEA ignored expert testimony and placed MDMA in Schedule 1, declaring, again, no medical value and a high potential for abuse. Just like that, MDMA therapy went underground, and it flourished in the underground, and it flourished in the rave and the dance club scene, and the war on drugs marched on. Now we're looking at the treatments that could heal its own consequences. Ironically, if we had legal access to MDMA, it wasn't the medicine again that failed; it was the system that couldn't hold it. And then we're getting a little bit more modern here. This is where my childhood, Reagan. I was born in 1980. And so this is your brain on drugs. I'm sure we all remember this. DARE, that program launched in 1983. It reached 75% of American school districts at its peak. It was funded with hundreds of millions of federal dollars, our tax dollars. Three major analyses in 1994, 1999, and 2009. They all found the same thing. There was no measurable effect on drug use. Some studies even found increases in drug use amongst kids that were exposed to the DARE program compared to the control group. The Just Say No framework, it framed addiction as a moral failure and not as a health issue. And we're still untangling this today for all drugs, not just psychedelics. This wasn't a public health campaign that didn't work. It was a cultural campaign that worked exactly as designed by carving fear and propaganda into a generation. So this isn't just an argument for or against a specific drug. It's a question about whether these policies achieve their goals. Over $1 trillion was spent on the war on drugs. The United States incarcerates more people per capita than any country on earth. 1 in 5 of those inmates is in for a mere drug possession offense. Black Americans are 3.6 times more likely to be arrested for cannabis than white Americans, despite equal use rates, according to the ACLU. Overdose deaths rise across the entire war on drugs era, not fall. And the actual drug use rates have been roughly flat the whole time, meaning we're using the same amount of drugs. By every metric that was claimed as an objective of this policy, the policy failed. All right, I'm going to get a little personal. So this is where the psychedelic history and me, Jacob Tell, first intersect. So I was a DARE kid in the 80s. I had the shirt, I had the like lunch pail and the pencil and the whole thing. I internalized this Just Say No. I believed it. For years, I felt this flicker of fear in my body whenever someone said the word psychedelic. And then years later, I went to a Fish concert and something cracked open, not just because of the mushrooms that I had that night, but because I saw 20,000 people in this altered state of consciousness, peacefully connected and joyful. And the story that I've been told about those people didn't match what I was actually experiencing. Around the same time, the science was making its own movement. Quietly in academic journals, the third wave was finally starting. We started to have research once again. So let's go to the third wave. We're almost through the history, and then we'll go into mushroom talk, which I know everyone's excited about. So third wave, 1990, we had Rick Strassman. He got DEA approval to give a psychedelic compound called DMT to human volunteers. This was the first psychedelic study in 25 years. This is an amazing moment. In 2000, at Yale, John Crystal, he worked with ketamine. They had a rapid antidepressant effect within hours. This is, again, working on a different mechanism in the brain than the classic psychedelics, and the glutamate system rather than the serotonin system. And this was the gateway for discovery of psychedelic therapy in the modern era. 2006, we had Johns Hopkins University. Roland Griffiths there was doing a psilocybin study that was showing that a single high dose of mushrooms produced what most participants described as one of the most meaningful experiences of their lives, with measurable positive effects 14 months after their experience. In 2009, MAPS, this is a great nonprofit that's been active since the 80s. MAPS stands for the Multidisciplinary Association of Psychedelic Studies. They began their phase 2 MDMA for PTSD trials. Sadly, in 2024, it was declined by the FDA, going back to war on drugs and big pharma, stunting our cognitive liberties once again. But we're at it. We're working with the VA now. There's other groups that are doing more MDMA trials again here in 2026. So we're not giving up. 2018 and 2019, the FDA granted breakthrough therapy designation for psilocybin mushrooms and MDMA. That's a fast track designation reserved for treatments that are showing substantial improvement over existing therapies. And then most recently in 2019, Johns Hopkins opens the first psychedelic research center in the US, funded entirely by private donations because they couldn't get federal money. But there's people out there that believe. So let's define which targeted clinical applications of the third wave research, what we're focusing on today. These are 5, but there's more, but these are kind of the big 5. I know my graphic only shows 4, but just go with it. The first one we have is acute pain and depression. We have studies using ketamine for cancer, pain management, and treatment-resistant depression. Second is end-of-life anxiety with psilocybin mushrooms for existential dread and treatment in cancer patients. Third is TBI, or traumatic brain injuries. This is an ibogaine study for veterans with severe traumatic brain injuries. PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, again, veteran-based MDMA-assisted therapy. They're also using for couples therapy too, not just for PTSD. And last but not least, addiction with ibogaine for opioid, alcohol, methamphetamine, nicotine, and other dependencies. So these are some of the things that are actively being researched and studied right now. We're gaining data around all of these points. And I'm not going to read through these, but you can see there's lots of trials. The thing that's interesting is that you see things like smoking cessation up there, end-of-life anxiety, traumatic brain injury, PTSD, treatment-resistant depression, like generalized anxiety. These are a lot of different areas that are being studied and that psychedelics are having a great impact around. And then this is fascinating. Less than 2 months ago, in April of 2026, Nature Medicine published the largest psychedelic neuroimaging study ever conducted, where they do brain scan images. And an international team led at McGill University, they pooled 11 separate studies, more than 500 imaging sessions, and over 260 participants. They looked at 5 completely different compounds: psilocybin mushrooms, LSD, DMT, mescaline, and ayahuasca. And those are the 5 there pictured. These compounds bind different receptors with different affinities. They last for different durations, and they produce subjectively different experiences. So you would expect that they would have different brain signatures. Instead, they found exactly one shared pattern. In all 5 cases, the brain's rigid functionality, our networks loosen. This is called the default mode network. And the connections between those networks opens up. The same signature every time. So let's shift over to modern policy real quick, because I think this is important. There's actively, a lot happening across the country from state by state efforts, which is here on the screen, as well as federally, which I'll talk about in a moment. So first, we had Oregon paving the way. They passed in 2020, the first state to legalize supervised psilocybin mushroom therapy. So if for people that are concerned about doing this legally, maybe you take a trip to Oregon or Colorado or New Mexico. Soon, hopefully California. Service centers opened in 2023, so it took a couple years to get that going. Next, Colorado is 2022. They decriminalized the personal use, and they have a regulated therapy framework. So you can actually find a therapist to do mushroom journeys legally in Colorado. New Mexico, it's strictly for medical therapy, and they don't have decriminalized yet. And then there's 24 cities across the country that have decriminalized possession, ceremonial use, therapeutic use, gifting, and growing of mushrooms and other plant medicines, including Oakland and Santa Cruz and Seattle and Detroit and DC and many more. And then there's active legislation in 22 states right now, including California. So what does this mean? That a person possessing psilocybin in Denver and a person possessing psilocybin in Dallas are living in fundamentally different countries right now. That's going to keep being true until the federal government catches up. Which brings us to what happened on April 18th. Less than a month ago, President Trump signed an executive order titled Accelerating Medical Treatments for Serious Mental Illness. There's 4 key provisions. The FDA is now able to fast track some of these compounds. Instead of 6 to 12 months, they'll be doing it in 1 to 2 months. They've set aside $50 million to match state government investments in serious mental illness research. I mentioned ibogaine before. That's one of the big compounds being studied there. 3, they've expanded access pathways for investigational psychedelics, including ibogaine. It's a significant win for veterans with TBI and for addiction. Kentucky, the state of Kentucky, has been pushing this for years, and Texas after them. Basically, the states that have been hit hardest by the opioid epidemics were the first ones to pony up cash that they got from the opioid payouts into this research. So there's a direct correlation between the opioid deaths and what they can do about it with these psychedelic compounds. And then last but not least, the Attorney General is directed to initiate the DEA to reschedule from Schedule 1 to a lower, hopefully 3 or 4, D schedule is what I want, get them off there altogether, to review after successful phase 3 trials. So if a drug makes it all the way through phase 3 in the FDA, it can then be considered to be rescheduled out of Schedule 1, which would be a huge win when that finally happens. So we have bipartisan momentum, which in this day and age is very rare. Veterans groups at the forefront. We have libertarians, we have harm reduction advocates, we have cognitive liberty advocates, and now the White House pushing the same direction, maybe for different reasons, but we'll take any win we can get. I've said this term several times. This is near and dear to my heart. Cognitive liberty, this was coined in the 90s. A lot of people consider this a first freedom, meaning the freedom of speech, the freedom of religion, the freedom of the press, the right to control one's own consciousness, to think, to feel, and to explore one's own mind without state coercion. Cognitive liberty is the idea that what happens inside of your own head is fundamentally yours. The state can regulate what you put in your body, what's for sale, what's on the highway, what's for public safety, but inside the confines of your mind is the most private possible space. The Supreme Court has actually ruled on it in 2006. There was a case that unanimously 8-0, I guess one of them held out, that a small Brazilian American religious community had the right to drink ayahuasca tea in their ceremonies under the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So that is settled law. So what about mushrooms? Thank you for your attention to the context. Now we have a little history, a little culture, some context for this. Let's go specifically into psilocybin mushrooms because these are one of the most accessible psychedelic compounds. You can grow them in your own house. 3 states it's legal, many more to come. So Psilocybe cubensis. While there are hundreds of species of psychedelic mushrooms, the one at the center of the modern clinical research is Psilocybe cubensis. Sorry if I'm butchering that name. This specific species grows naturally all over the world, from Americas to Southeast Asia. Today, it has an incredible strain diversity, but it remains the gold standard for scientists and for researchers that are trying to standardize doses for therapeutic use. So what happens when the mushroom enters the body? The mushroom contains psilocybin, but your body actually metabolizes it into a compound called psilocin. The biological reason for this molecule fitting into your brain so perfectly is called structural mimicry. Psilocin looks almost identical to the serotonin that is naturally produced in our brains, allowing it to bind directly to what's called the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. This is the same receptor that works for a lot of these psychedelics. But when you look at the molecule of serotonin and you look at psilocin for mushrooms, they're almost a mirror image of one another. It's fascinating. This actually goes back to what's called the stoned ape theory, which is that our ancestors millions of years ago, these apes ate some mushrooms off a cow patty, and that's how we developed our brains to get consciousness. That psychedelics actually led to consciousness. Some people believe this. This binding acts as a molecular trigger. It promotes neuroplasticity and growth of our neurons, physically changing the synaptic architecture of the brain. Pharmacology doesn't capture the lived experience. So what does a journey actually feel like? Typically, the onset for mushrooms takes about 20 to 40 minutes, with a peak that lasts maybe 1 to 2 hours, and a total duration of 4 to 6 hours. During this time, the brain's default mode network, this is the part of the brain that's responsible for our ego and for self-referential thought, is temporarily quieted. And ruminating, depressive thought patterns can loosen up, for example. This often translates to a profound sense of ego dissolution, emotional release, and a deep feeling of unity with the world around. Some people say ego death rather than ego dissolution. Going back to the thing I talked about a minute ago with the Elysian mysteries of ancient Greece, this was based on a premise that if you die before you die, then you won't die when you die. Let that sink in. Perhaps ego death is a more accurate term after all. Either way, this loss of ego, even for a few hours, can profoundly connect people with the oneness of the universe, see themselves in others, and find an inner peace that calms anxiety. Science needed a way to measure the unmeasurable, which led to the Mystical Experience Questionnaire. This is known as the MEQ30. It measures 6 dimensions: unity, sacredness, noetic quality, transcendence, positive mood, and ineffability. In 2006, researchers at Johns Hopkins University, again led by Roland Griffiths, they showed that psilocybin mushrooms reliably produced mystical type experiences. And that is an actual medical term, mystical type experiences. The data shows that actually having a mystical experience is not just a side effect of mushrooms. A high MEQ score actually predicts whether the patient's depression will go into remission. So this metric will show if someone will potentially be able to get relief from their depression. Talking a little bit about the therapeutic container. This is important. This is not just have a bag of mushrooms and eat them in your house. A lot of people need to have the right containers, and the therapeutic container is really important as we scale this nationwide, worldwide. So the FDA, they've approved a specific therapeutic container. This includes a rigorous health screening, preparatory therapy sessions, a dosing day where the patient wears an eye mask and listens to music, supervised by 2 trained facilitators. In psychedelic medicine, there's set and setting. The set is your mindset and your intention, and the setting is your physical and social environment. This determines the outcome more than the mushrooms themselves. And then we have to talk a little bit about dosing. I'm sure people have heard a lot about microdosing. So how much should people take? These are sort of 3 tiers that people talk about. The microdosing is roughly like 0.1 to 0.3 grams of dried mushrooms. This is subperceptual. You shouldn't feel anything. This is a framework popularized by James Fadiman, studied for mood and focus and creativity. But recent placebo-controlled trials in 2020 at Imperial College suggest much of the benefit is expectancy effect. So the data here is mixed on does microdosing work or not. It's sort of a case by case, but it's an entry point into mushroom experience. From there, we move into the mini dose. I like to call it the museum dose. You might take a little and go look at some art in the museum. This is maybe a half a gram to a gram and a half. This is a little bit of a perceptual shift, nothing major. Social and creative settings are good for this. You might have some color enhancements and some increased conversation, but it's not overwhelming at all. And then you get into more of the macro dosing or ceremonial dosing, or some people say heroic dosing. This gets anywhere from maybe 2.5 to up to 6-8 grams. This is the full psychedelic experience. This is the dose that is used in clinical trials, and it's always paired with hours of preparation. A trained therapist or guide is present during the session, and we have structured integration after the experience. Integration is everything too. I just want to say that if you're having these experiences, how do you then take them into your day-to-day life? How do you integrate them into your world afterwards? It also depends on the strain, because not all mushrooms are created equal. So when it comes to the amount of psilocybin that they contain, these sort of your mileage may vary, because one strain and another could be half or 2x as strong. So the dose and the context really determine the outcome more than the mushrooms themselves. So to close out this section about mushrooms, why is psilocybin leading the charge over LSD, over MDMA, and over ketamine? Well, first, it has deep indigenous roots. We've talked about the importance of this for thousands of years, ceremonial history. Practically, it's a 4 to 6 hour duration, which is a much more manageable for clinics and therapists than a 12-hour LSD session. And most importantly, in a 2010 study, published by David Nutt, showing that the mushrooms have the absolute lowest physiological toxicity of any common recreational drug. They are not physically addictive, and they build a tolerance so rapidly that natural resistance of daily abuse is common. So people are not abusing mushrooms, even if you're microdosing on a regular basis. All right, this next slide is more for me than you, but we're gonna take a breath. And yeah, that was a lot of information. So I hope it's I didn't talk too fast, but I have a few more slides here, and then we'll get into some questions. So, what you do with all of this information, this is up to you. But here are 5 things that you can do, regardless of whether you ever consider using any of these substances yourselves. One is education, with primary resources, places like Johns Hopkins Center for Psychedelic Studies, MAPS, Arrowhead, which is an internet-based harm reduction website, the Psychedelic Science Conference in Denver every other year. Read the actual papers, not the headlines. Number 2, question Prohibition-era assumptions about all drugs, not just psychedelics. The history is more compelling than, quote, drugs are bad. Caffeine is a drug. Tobacco is a drug. SSRIs are drugs. The line we draw are historical, not natural. 3, protect your mental health proactively. Therapy, sleep, exercise, community, nature, breath work. These are the foundations. Psychedelics are not a shortcut, but they can be a tool integrated in your life. 4, vote informed. The state level policy fights are where the action is. Read the actual ballot measures, watch what your state legislature is doing, and vote accordingly. And 5, if you're curious, be patient. Legal therapeutic access is coming. Oregon, Colorado, New Mexico, soon others. Underground is not the only path. All right. With that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit into what Kitty introduced me as running a psychedelic social club. We call this District 216. And I just wanted to show you some photos of it because you probably are wondering, what is a psychedelic social club? And how do you have such a thing in Santa Barbara? This is our space. We have a beautiful courtyard area where normally we park our cars, but we clear out the cars and we put a stage up, and we have about at our bigger events about 300 people that come and listen to talks about psychedelics and consciousness and wellness and healing. We base everything around this concept of edutainment. So we like to bring the education and the entertainment together. We do a lot of interviews. So on our weekly schedule, we meet every Wednesday night in Santa Barbara in our space, and not out in the parking lot, but inside. We do the smaller gatherings of 20 to 30 people. And we have a little set there, and we bring thought leaders up and we do interviews. This is at least 2 to 3 Wednesdays a month. We have different people coming from all over the world. We do roundtables at least once a month where we sit in a circle and talk about challenges of life and psychedelics and how things can change in terms of our mental wellness and access to compounds and so forth. We do workshops. This was like a breathwork workshop that we did. We do documentary screenings as well. So again, a lot of education there. And then just to show some photos of the bigger events, we call them our marquee events. We have full discussion panels on the stage around a topic. Last Saturday was our most recent one. We did a marquee event on addiction and psychedelics. So it was a very powerful conversation on the stage with people that have either struggled from addiction, sharing personal stories. We also had some therapists and ibogaine professionals talking about how to, get resources to your loved ones that are struggling. Then we have fun. We have dancing and music and lights and all the things. There's our full crowd at our parking lot. Again, we get about 300 people that show up to these. It's all generations. We have 20 somethings to 80 somethings in the room. It's a really special space we've cultivated. And then for those of you who can't be in Santa Barbara, we offer an online app, online community. And so we have, this is some screenshots from that. People go in there and chat with each other. All of the interviews that we host get recorded and edited and put into the app. Here's an example of Timothy Leary's son, Zachary Leary, who was just here April 1st, a few weeks ago. And these are 90-minute, long talks, so they're pretty rich. We have a concierge service for people that don't really know where to start and go to find a trusted guide or therapist. They can use our concierge service that will match seekers and guides to make that trusted match. And then we have resources from our speakers that want to give curriculum or videos or audios or meditations or all sorts of things. So it's a really beautiful, flourishing online community. 2023, here's our events. We did 55 events year one. 2024, we also did 55 events. Last year, we did 58 events. We beat our record finally. And already this year, we're on track to do the same. So we're at 193 in 3+ years so far. And we're going and growing. And next is Denver, Colorado. And other cities will go and do pop-up events as well. So what we like to say is no one should heal in isolation. We should be healing in community. We should be normalizing these conversations about pain and trauma and fear and coming together and healing in group, whether that's talking in a circle, whether that's actually doing psychedelics together. There's a lot of different modalities for community healing. And we also like to say that we are the medicine. We have the answers. Nobody should be a healer for you. You should be your own healer. You should be able to learn from others and then take and integrate those learnings to heal yourself. So we are the medicine. We have the ability to heal ourselves. And with that, thank you very much for having me. We'll open it up for questions.
Hi, thank you. You mentioned that the act has the words, I believe, severe mental illness in it that President Trump just signed. What has been the research with psychedelics and schizophrenia?
That's a really good question. So schizophrenia is one of there's like bipolar, borderline, and personality and schizophrenia that it's you got to be really careful about psychedelic use with those populations. And there are some studies, and actually there's other anecdotes and authors that have written books about I'm a bipolar and I use psilocybin mushrooms and here's my diagnosis and my experience. There are starting to be some studies on it, but I would say that you need to have a medical team around you if you are in one of those populations before going into. I would not do this recreationally. I would do this therapeutically. And yeah, there are starting to be some studies. I can follow up with you and send you some articles. I'm sorry? Yes. Yeah. The challenge is that sometimes when people don't know yet that they're schizophrenic, they could have a psychedelic experience that could trigger the schizophrenia to express especially in young teens and 20 something year olds. And so you have to be really careful about that.
Now, my question is about ketamine. You listed it as synthetic. So obviously you can take it in larger quantities, more concentrated. Matthew Perry killed himself with ketamine. His practitioner was sentenced to 7 years in prison this past week and 3 years probation for supplying the ketamine. Is it a question of concentration? Or why is ketamine in a criminal level rather than the mushrooms?
It's a good question. So first of all, that was a sensationalized headline. I just want to say that Matthew Perry died of drowning in a hot tub. You should not be taking any drugs alone in a hot tub. So he didn't die from ketamine. He died from drowning. So just to be super clear on that, they put that in the headline to try to, sell more newspapers and get more clicks.
Well, that was the court mention or direction this past week.
The doctor was prescribing him way too much ketamine. That's a separate issue, though. That's not how he died. just to be clear, to separate those two, the doctor was prescribing him ridiculous amounts of ketamine and not in a safe way. And he was basically just a drug dealer for him. Matthew Perry suffered from addiction of many things beyond ketamine. Ketamine has a potential for addiction. We just highlighted that at our addiction and psychedelics event. We had a talk called The Dark Side of Ketamine. So while it can be used very therapeutic, safe setting, it can also be a slippery slope for some people when used incorrectly and can become habit forming. So it's an interesting one because it's so dose and context dependent. When you're, for example, with ketamine, it's what they use when you're being put under, in operations and surgery. And so those are super high doses. That's like you're blacking out,
so
going up to 90, Vietnam War when someone would lose a limb, they would use ketamine on those soldiers. But then at moderate doses, they're taking people into a ketamine clinic, and you're actually able to have like a therapeutic, benefit from the use. Then there's kind of lower dosing where people are just taking it really recreationally on a daily basis, and that can be where the danger comes in of it becoming habit forming. Yeah. So know your dose.
Yeah. On an international level, what are other countries doing? Are have they made more progress than we have?
That's a great question.
And the other half is protecting younger people.
Mm-hmm. There are a lot in Europe. There are countries that are doing studies as well. It's not just, we're actually behind. Israel's been doing quite a lot of work in psychedelics a lot earlier than the States and other countries in Europe. South America, there absolutely are incredible studies happening. And there's also psychedelic societies, much like ours, all over the world, where you can have education and people coming together to learn around that. I would say for young people, it's all about education. We want to make sure we're getting the right information out and that we have resources for them. So it's not just a just say no situation.
So these are going to be remaining as controlled substances. Obviously,
yep.
Youth cannot get their hands on this.
I would argue it's easier to get controlled substances than it's easier to get the illegal things than like alcohol and cigarettes, like right. Ironically, but yeah. But yeah, in terms of ketamine, you can get ketamine legally in a clinic, or you can also get it illegally on the black market. There's both situations out there for sure. Yeah. And also with the fentanyl crisis, you have to be very careful about ketamine, and people need to test their ketamine if they're getting it illegally.
Yeah, I've got several questions. A few years ago, Dr. Sanjay
Gupta
had a 2-hour TV special about the uses around the world. I was especially inspired by a story about a child in Colorado. She had an epileptic fits, almost 100 a week. After taking some psychedelic drugs, she was down to 5 or so, and it fits a week.
I think that's Charlotte and Charlotte's Web, and that's a CBD cannabis plant. I believe that was what that special was about. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it's spectacular. You should watch it. Dr. Sanjay Gupta went from being an anti-drug, just say no person to coming to the other side and advocating for safe and responsible use.
Okay, the second one is a statement. But haven't people fried their brains? I know some of them.
You can use a baseball bat to hit a ball, or you can use a baseball bat to hit a human. It's a tool. You can use them wisely. You can use them not wisely. So sure, you can fry your brain with too much sugar and too much caffeine and too much alcohol. I would say alcohol is has the most detriment in society to any compound out there, and the numbers back that up.
And then one saying, great program, very innovative and informative. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then please show the slide again with book recommendations.
Oh, that's at the end. I think you have to do that.
And share.
Yeah, there's a few book recommendations there. There you go.
Yeah.
That one.
Hi. I enjoyed the part where you were talking about the history of the government regulation. And that they're loosening through efforts. They're now loosening that up and allowing more research. But again, it seems like there's a whole community out there who can't wait for the research to tell them this is what you should be taking and who to take it with. So who is that community who've kind of, it sounds like they've gone on their own. They've decided they're their own bosses, or they're their own support group.
Well, there's actually some incredible nonprofits that are the bridge for veterans and for people suffering from TBI that are taking folks to Mexico, because a lot of these compounds are legal in Mexico. You can take ibogaine, DMT, 5-MeO, the toad, all these things are legal in Mexico. And so there's actually beautiful clinics down in Mexico that you can take an addicted person or someone suffering from PTSD or TBI to. And there's nonprofits that are paying for veterans that are suicidal to take them across the border, put them in these programs for a week, and they come out inspired and loving life after, a single weekend of psychedelic treatment. It's pretty amazing.
One or two last one. Okay.
The last slide.
The book.
The final slide. The one that you were on. That one, the very end. Yep.
We can have one last question if there is one last question. Otherwise, yes, one last question.
Yeah, know your dose is everything is very much individualized. If you're taking, for example, an SSRI and like an antidepressant, that can really dampen the effects of taking mushrooms. So your dose would need to increase because of that. So it's true. Our physiologies and our metabolisms are unique to us. So a lot of this is like meeting science and trial and art in the middle to figure out what works for you. It's kind of like if you're taking a supplement or vitamin or anything else, you kind of figure out what works for your body and use a little bit of your intuition to do that, and a little trial and error. Start low, go slow. You can always take more, you can't take less, and know your dose eventually.
Thank you. Is there one last question? Okay. Jacob, are you up for one?
Oh yeah, I'll answer all your questions.
I saw no. Yeah. Okay. You need a microphone.
They're going to get you a mic. It's coming, sir. Thank you.
Just as you talked about, Jake, about on the war on drugs, how they colored the black people and the drugs used to increase. Okay, well, this is what happened. I'm a researcher and writer on Western history, and I'm doing research right now about the Chinese. And ironically, the same thing happened against the Chinese. They said, "You're Chinese, you have opium, let's get rid of them."
That's true.
And so so that was a kind of unwritten underground movement in America. You see Chinese?
And they did it with cannabis in the jazz era. They did it with Reefer Madness. You remember that? It was a whole campaign for against Mexican and black populations in the 20s. So yeah, same thing.
And also too, another thing you said too about drinking. Well, alcohol was legal. Okay, I have not yet found an instance where two Chinese got involved into a fight or shooting people because they had too much opium.
That's right.
They had controlled use of it as a recreation. But non-Chinese people, they drank to the high heaven. And I did a lot of reading and research. A lot of shooting was two people that didn't know each other. They just got so bomb drunk, they started shooting at each other. And that's the American West for you.
The end.
Yeah, not to be cynical, but the government wants us.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jacob. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
There you go.
Okay.
shooting him head off. Yeah.